our next presenter, Kayis-Kumar and Michael Walpole from the University of New South Wales, and they're going to be presenting today on the taxing times, identifying and supporting carers experiencing serious financial hardship. So I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Melissa. How do you do? I'm Michael, and Anne will. I'm going to start with some background to the tax clinic at UNSW, and Anne will be taking us in and focusing more on the issues of concern to people at this event. The tax clinic at UNSW is established to provide students with an opportunity to learn by themselves, providing advice under supervision by professionals to people who need tax advice. The focus of our clients is people who are vulnerable, financially vulnerable, and who have a tax problem. You might think, well, how can you be financially vulnerable and have a tax problem? Well, believe me, you can. Often, your tax issues follow you from a time when you had income to a time when you no longer have income. Hayden, if I could have the next slide, please. So our focus is on vulnerable individuals who cannot afford independent professional tax advice, often people who have lost control of their tax compliance obligations. Many of them have been in small businesses and things have gone badly in the small business. And we provide for them the support to get their tax affairs back online. The tax advice and advocacy services, where we deal with these issues on behalf of individuals, is actually part of a larger vision to provide essentially the opportunity for people to have some financial well-being and to regain control of their finances. As we go through these processes with clients, of course, we as academics come across hotspots and sticking points in the tax system, which we identify for research and resolution, and we then, of course, make submissions on behalf of our clients to have those hotspots fixed up. We are one of the, I think now 11 national tax clinics in the country. The first of these was established in Western Australia, Curtin Business School, and then as part of the 2019 federal election, both sides of politics actually came to the election with a proposal for the establishment of tax clinics in the country. So they operate very like legal aid clinics, but they are tax aid clinics. Thanks, Hayden. Next slide. We have set ourselves up, and not all of the clinics do it quite this way, where we engage with community support services as a source for our clients. So people actually, for the most part, come to us from financial counselors, and we set up to assist them. And often, as you know, once you've got your tax affairs sorted out, that opens the gate to lots of government support services. And so we're actually quite an important part in unlocking the flow of benefits to people where they've got themselves into a muddle. Thanks, Hayden. Next slide. We are Sydney-based, and there are two of us in Sydney. We at UNSW, and there's one at Western Sydney University. But we actually have quite a large footprint because we, unlike some of the other clinics, are quite prepared to provide phone advice and remote access to our services for clients who are further out of Sydney. And you can see from that heat map just how far away our clients are. We would go further, quite honestly, if we had the opportunity, but we're very respectful of the other clinics and their catchment. And so we will only step in if other support is not available to people. I think that's probably enough background about the clinic, how it works, and what we're trying to achieve. I'll hand across to Anne now to focus now on the issues that we can help with as concerns carers. Thank you. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you, Michael. And like Michael was saying, when we do get a client touch point, it's often through a referral. And so that gives us an element of comfort that we're helping someone who is in genuine need. And what we do that is largely inspired by the legal clinic setting, is to get the students to run through at the initial client appointment some top-level socio-demographic questions. But what we've also been doing on top of that, especially recently, has been screening them for things like financial well-being, psychological distress. So we run the Kessler-6, and again, this is all by client consent. If they choose not to participate, that is entirely up to them, and it doesn't affect the tax advice that they are given at the end of the day. But we've also been running a screening test on whether or not someone is a carer. And so the data that we've got for today is off the back of those screening scales that we run that help us to aggregate our client pool through the back end of the client data set to identify trends and issues. And in doing so, hopefully hotspots like Michael was mentioning that we can then communicate to policymakers and governments, and in doing so help not just the individual clients that we serve, but a wider cohort of people in need. Next slide, please, Hayden. Thank you. And so I'm not sure if you're able to see the numbers or the words on this particular slide. Hopefully it's not too... But this is a snapshot of our overall client base compared to the general population. So as you can see, we have an overrepresentation of Indigenous clients. We also see an overrepresentation of clients experiencing severe psychological distress, so at least 3 times the general population level of probable serious mental illness. We've also been troubled to see very high incidents of women experiencing domestic violence, people who are living below the poverty line. And as you can see, the statistics there are not painting a very happy story. If anything, it shows, like Michael was saying, that just because you have a tax problem, it doesn't mean that you can afford to pay for the resolution of that tax problem. And these are clients with very complex needs. And so it really is, I think, important for us to shine a spotlight on how the tax profession can use its skills to support this cohort of clients. If you wouldn't mind, please, Hayden, the next slide. So the key piece for us for today is then to look at how the carer, self-identifying as carer segment of our client base compares to the rest of our client base, and what the issue. One of the biggest takeaways is that, like Michael was mentioning, Centrelink, depending on whether a client has a lot of long-term overdue tax returns that they haven't lodged, that can present a barrier to accessing carer payment. And that really is the pointy end, because if we are able to remove that barrier, then at least we can unlock that extra element of some support that the client likely needs. Often the clients who come to us can't just go and get a paid professional to do this for them. They have to choose between paying for food or paying for a tax agent. And so that's clearly a situation where a service like this, that's free, independent of the ATO and confidential, is so important, and where we're looking to really explore how we can better help the rest of the community that helps this cohort too. So very much a call to action of, please let us know if there's anything else we can do, and if there are any ways that we can better support your clients, or if you've got any comments as well, that would be terrific. But what we have seen from our carer clients, so a bit of a caveat, we've only just been running this screening scale in the last year or so, and so we don't have a large sample size. So that is part of ongoing research, but our preliminary results do show that nearly a third of our clients are carers. The majority of them are women, aged between 34 and 56. Also, the majority are currently unemployed. Some were previously small business owners, and that's where the tax piece can come back to bite. So it doesn't necessarily mean just because you've got overdue returns that you've got a debt to the ATO. Typically, if you've got overdue returns, but you are, say, getting a salary or a wage, you're probably entitled to a refund. But just because you haven't press submit, you're showing up as being, non-compliant from a tax perspective. So that's problematic, and it's something that is readily resolved by someone who has the space and the expertise to help. But if you've got so many other things going on in your life, including care responsibilities among other things, then of course it's it seems like it's a barrier, of an access to justice barrier, to be requiring those individuals to have the burden of that sort of compliance obligation. So that's where we hope to help. So our cohort of clients, like I was mentioning before, long-term overdue tax returns. On average for our client base, it is 7 years behind on being 7 years behind on individual tax returns. But for our carer clients, it's even higher, at 9 years behind on income tax returns. And one of our carer clients was 19 years behind on her returns. And that obviously meant that she wasn't able to get a carer payment until we dealt with the tax returns piece. So it's something where we're really interested in continuing research in this space, and getting any suggestions or feedback from you all would just be terrific. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and hope to answer any questions and keep in touch.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I'm just, if anyone wants just to add any questions in the chat, but while we're waiting to see if any come through, I do have some questions myself. It's very interesting content. I guess for service providers or people engaging with carers, would there be any key indicators or things to look out for that service providers or other individuals might be able to identify or explore further that might suggest that carers could look into their tax, or that there are things there that they could access?
So Melissa, just to make sure I've got the question right. So if
Yep.
you've got a referral agency potentially screening to see whether or not a tax clinic referral might be appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for
Yeah.
us, we will accept any client who has any sort of tax issue. It doesn't necessarily just have to be a tax return related issue. But if they've got a letter from the ATO, then that's definitely something where we provide a high priority stream to getting support from one of our registered tax agents. But if they have any sort of question around tax, be it a lodgement issue, an objection maybe to an ATO assessment, particularly where we see with clients who have been experiencing domestic violence, where there's sexually transmitted tax debts, if you will, and we'll support clients in those instances as well. So a range of issues. Pretty much if they see the word tax or suspect there's something to do with the tax lens that might be a barrier for the client in that moment from a financial perspective, then please flick them our way, or to any of their states' clinics within the national program.
Great. And it sounds like you do offer quite a large range of services in relation to tax. I guess the other thing would be you mentioned some of the benefits around that people actually can get money back from tax, but how do we raise awareness of this, I guess, as community members with carers, as something that they might want to look into further or address for themselves?
That's a really good question. Often we find that with clients, if they're more than 2 or 3 years behind, it just gets really overwhelming to get on top of their tax affairs. Even if they're, relatively simple, it's just a lot of headspace that you need to sit down and work through something like tax, which often, people aren't excited to be thinking about in the first instance. So I would just say if there is any sort of inkling of potentially the client's not done their taxes in a while, then maybe you'll actually get a refund, and that can provide a significant lump sum of money as a result. If it's been something outstanding for a number of years, there could be thousands of dollars of a refund that the client is owed by the ATO.
I could comment on that. So we've had occasions where the students have helped people go back many years through their bank statements, and the students, of course, they get stuck in, and this is all entirely confidential, so there's no privacy problem. The students get stuck in, and they will find the income that's come in, and they will identify the deductions that might be available. And often there's an over withholding in Australia of tax. If you're earning wages, often more's been withheld than you actually owe at the end of the year. And so those little amounts year over year mount up, and we've had people walk away with substantial refunds when at the time they came in, they were terribly distressed because they didn't want to do their returns because they thought they'd end up with a bill. It's actually the other way around.
Yeah, and I guess that's something to really, for carers who are experiencing that financial hardship and are already distressed about money, if there are opportunities for them to be able to access that money that they're eligible for, I guess that's something to really, suggest that they look into, or to follow up with yourselves or their state clinic, just because, I'm sure that extra money would definitely come in handy for those costs of caring. Great. Well, if there's no further questions from the audience, we might move on to the next presentation. So thank you so much again for that really interesting and insightful presentation.